I don't like responsibility.
We're live.
But yes, I know you are.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, all right, so I'm going to MC tonight, and I will introduce people very briefly, because we did not do our homework and get each other our detailed introductions, but that's all right, because we're really just here to hear what people have to say and read 5-minute excerpts from their work. And I will be keeping time on the side with a little alarm, so when you hear that little ding, ding, ding on my phone, wrap it up. So, but we are going to start with a little bit longer of a reading, I think, from Sarah Hernandez, who will give us, I think, an introduction from her forthcoming book. And I believe, Sarah, do you talk a little bit about the Oak Lake Writers Society in that book? And so this is, we are the artists who will soon be formerly known as the Oak Lake Writers Society. We are changing our name, I think, to the Oceti Sakowin Writers Society, correct? So we come from all of the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota peoples in what is now the state of South Dakota and beyond. So the first reader is Sarah Hernandez, who is from the Rosebud Sioux tribe. I have a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. I'm Kim Tallbear. I'm a member of the Sistenwalk in Oyate. I grew up in Flanders, South Dakota. And I'm a longtime member of the Oak Lake Writers Society. I think since like 2001 was my first year, and it was incredibly intimidating. Lydia Whirlwind Soldier met me, and I was very intimidated. All right, Sarah, please come up.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Hernandez. I've been a member of the Oak Lake Writers Society since, well, Elizabeth Cookland invited me to join the society in 2012. I think I attended my first retreat in 2014, and over the past several years, the Oak Lake Writers Society has been really instrumental in helping shape my writing and research, especially my new book. Liz actually suggested the title for the book, which is titled We Are the Stars, Colonizing and Decolonizing the Oceti Sakowin Literary Tradition. And so many of the writers in this room have really helped shape this project. And so I wanted to start by reading my acknowledgments where I first talk about Oak Lake. And then I'd like to read my preface where I give a little bit of history on the Oceti Sakowin literary tradition. So We Are the Stars is a community-based project written with the guidance and support of many people. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Elizabeth Cookland, Charles Woodard, and Lo Amiot for co-founding the society, a first-of-its-kind tribal group for Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota writers. I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to my kind and generous mentors, Liz and Chuck, for their vision, their passion, and the many, many voices they have uplifted over the years, including my own. We Are the Stars, as well as many other Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota books, short stories, essays, and poems, would not be possible without their wisdom, guidance, and commitment to preserving and perpetuating Oceti Sakowin oral histories, cultures, and literature. The Society and our annual summer tribal writing retreats have been instrumental in helping me understand and further appreciate our rich and complex literary tradition. I wish every Native writer and scholar had access to a supportive, intellectual, and creative space such as this one. Through the Society, I have gained a wonderful circle of mentors and friends who are committed to protecting and defending Oceti Sakowin literatures and who recognize the power words have in shaping and influencing our tribal nations. And so I'd like to start by reading the preface from my new book. My book opens with a quote from Albert Whitehat's book, Zuya, and he says, "What is in the stars is on earth, and what is on the earth is in the stars." So according to Oceti Sakowin elders, what exists above exists below, and what exists below exists above. Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota ways of knowing and thinking, our epistemologies and philosophies, are based on a long-standing intellectual tradition that has sustained our people for millennia. Each tribal band constituting the Oceti Sakowin relies upon ancestral star knowledge that reminds us of our connection to the land and each other. Traditionally, tribal elders and leaders impart star knowledge through oral stories passed down from family to family, community to community, and tribe to tribe, to remind each generation of our connection to everyone and everything. Although the Oceti Sakowin oral tradition still exists today, settler colonialism has dramatically altered how contemporary Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people preserve and perpetuate the wisdom reflected in the stars and the knowledge embedded in the land. Over the past 4 centuries, settler colonizers, including European and American fur traders, explorers, government officials, missionaries, teachers, etc., have reduced the rich and complex Oceti Sakowin oral tradition to a simpler English translation that now exists in print and electronic form. Efforts to linguistically colonize the Oceti Sakowin oral tradition began in earnest in the early 19th century when Congregationalist and Presbyterian missionaries invaded Minnesota Makoche. The Madawakan Dakota, the Oceti Sakowin tribe located furthest east, was the first of our 7 sister tribes to encounter missionary colonizers moving westward to, quote, put God's thoughts into their speech. In 1833, Samuel and Gideon Pond, 2 volunteer missionaries from Connecticut, traveled to Minnesota Makoche to tame what they described as, quote, the wild, bloodthirsty, and superstitious Dakotas. In 1833, Oceti Sakowin winter counts document a great meteor shower now known to many indigenous and non-indigenous people as the year the stars fell. Coincidence or not, the year the stars fell also marks the same year missionary colonizers began transcribing the Oceti Sakowin oral tradition. Not only did this linguistic/literary transformation impact how Oceti Sakowin star knowledge was shared with Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people and communities, it also affected who shared our tribal land narratives, how they shared them, and why they shared them. As discussed in my book, missionary colonizers did not simply learn the Dakota language to share the word of God with their potential converts. They also used their recently acquired knowledge of Dakota language and literature to mistranslate the treaties that physically and politically dispossessed the Dakota and later the Nakota and Lakota people of our ancestral homelands. Nearly 2 decades after missionary colonizers first began transcribing the Dakota language, the Pond brothers published the bilingual Dakota English newspaper, The Dakota Friend. The Dakota Friend captures some of the earliest printed references to the Dakota oral tradition, including a misinterpretation of Dakota origin narratives about Minnesota, which reaffirmed the Dakota Nation's intimate connection to Minnesota Makoche, a place they've called home since time immemorial. In 1851, missionary colonizers who coveted this land for themselves used the Dakota Friend to delegitimize the Oceti Sakowin's intellectual traditions and supplant them with new settler colonial land narratives that erased Dakota people from their homelands. That exact same year, the editors of the bilingual newspaper used their newly acquired knowledge of the Dakota language to mistranslate the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux and Treaty of Mendota, which ultimately stripped the Dakota Nation of 35 million acres of land and forced Dakota people to relocate to a 10-mile reservation in lower Minnesota. Specifically, Reverend Stephen R. Riggs misrepresented the term of these agreements by manipulating Dakota kinship terms, misinterpreting the words seed and sell, and adding an addendum that helped redirect treaty annuities to fur traders. By misrepresenting the terms of these treaties, Riggs and his missionary colleagues sparked a chain reaction of repercussions: broken treaties, land dispossession, starvation, war, imprisonment, mass execution, and exile that disenfranchised the Dakota Nation and deeply traumatized generations of Dakota people. The American nation's failure to uphold the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota culminated in the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. Dakota elder Eldon Lawrence, whose ancestors endured the devastation caused by the 1862 war, theorizes that the American nation, quote, might have succeeded in destroying Indian cultures if they had targeted Dakota women, the principal holders and transmitters of oral tradition. However, because the United States patriarchal government could not conceive of the possible existence of matriarchal societies, they targeted Dakota males by punishing them after the war with either death, prison, or exile. The time after the U.S.-Dakota War is often perceived as a lacuna or pause in Dakota literary production. However, I assert that this was actually an active transition period in which Dakota women envisioned new and creative ways to uphold their traditional role in tribal society as our culture keepers and culture bearers. Even more admirable, Dakota women accomplished this feat in the midst of war, imprisonment, relocation, exile, boarding schools, and numerous other harsh assimilationist policies intended to extinguish Oceti Sakowin epistemologies and philosophies. At Crow Creek, Dakota women protected their tribe's intellectual / literary traditions by taking them underground and quietly sharing them with close family and community members. In this book, I examine the many ways in which Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota women have adapted and modified the colonizers' tools to reclaim our rich intellectual traditions and reimagine our ancestral star knowledge and land narratives for future generations. Specifically, I explicate the work of the first published Dakota writer, Charles Eastman, Santee Dakota, who attempted to preserve his grandmother's oral teaching in his autobiographical books. I also examine the work of Dakota scholar and writer Ella Deloria, Yankton Sioux, who spent her life correcting and retranslating Riggs and the Pond Brothers mistranslation. I also examine the work of Elizabeth Cook Lynn, Crow Creek Sioux, who consciously and deliberately built upon her literary ancestors to reimagine traditional Dakota oral narratives as poetry, short stories, novels, and essay, and also established the Oak Lake Writers Society, a first-of-its-kind group for Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota writers. Collectively, these writers and scholars helped lay the groundwork for future literary decolonization efforts, and they emphasize that the Oceti Sakowin oral tradition is still thriving in the 21st century. We Are the Stars, Colonizing and Decolonizing the Oceti Sakowin literary tradition seeks to honor and celebrate Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota women for their unwavering commitment to sustaining our people, communities, and nations, despite significant barriers and challenges imposed by settler society. Dakota scholar Elizabeth Cook Lynn, who has dedicated her life to protecting and defending the Oceti Sakowin literary tradition, suggested the title for this book as a reminder that Dakota people came from the stars to be on earth. As tribal people, our oral traditions and the printed texts that have emerged from them have always been a source of strength and inspiration. Over the past 200 years, however, the Oceti Sakowin oral tradition has been subjected to several dramatic, often traumatic changes. It has not simply been handed down from generation to generation, from traditional Dakota oral storytellers to more modern Dakota writers and scholars, but rather was intercepted and misappropriated by settler colonizers, such as missionaries, teachers, and government officials to bolster the American nation. We Are the Stars decolonizes the Oceti Sakowin literary tradition by reminding contemporary Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people where we came from, who we are, and what is expected of us. And then I conclude the preface by saying, for nearly 200 years, American Indian, Native American, and indigenous literatures have been shaped and delivered by individuals from outside our tribal communities. And it's time for citizens of sovereign tribal nations to define and articulate our own literary traditions. And that's why I think a group like the Oak Lake Writers Society is so important and so powerful. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the stories that we have for this evening.
Sarah, can you remind us in the live stream the title of the book again and where they can?
Yeah, the book is titled We Are the Stars, Colonizing and Decolonizing the Oceti Sakowin Literary Tradition. And it just became available for purchase last night. And it's available on the University of Arizona Press website.
I did not know the role that those missionaries played in all that. I mean, I'm not surprised, but wow, thank you for that history lesson. Our next person that's going to read is Peggy Peters, who's a citizen of the Sistenwalk-Tenayate.
I'm not done writing it yet. No,
Do you want to switch places? Although
no, I'm okay.
That'll scare somebody else. Still writing.
No,
This is so great.
I tend to do that.
Peggy has the best t-shirts. I've got another really good one on. I think people will be able to see it.
Well, turn around before you get behind the podium so you can see it on the live stream. There we go. Sage against the machine. Yeah, it's all good.
Hi, I'm Peggy Peters, and I'm going to read a very, very short excerpt from one of my stories that I write. What I write a lot of times isn't what people would consider nonfiction, but in my head I consider it to be nonfiction because I believe that there's going to be a time when we are faced with some type of apocalyptic event. We may not all die, but I believe that the world as we know it will change drastically. And so we have to be prepared. I also write a lot of very sexy stories. Those I'm not going to read. Yeah, you have to have a note from your mom if you want to hear it. But yeah, this is just a short one. I was thinking of reading a different one that's more like about 4 minutes long, another excerpt. But nah, I won't do that. This is from a story I wrote on this website. It's called Map of the World, and it is about people who are fighting to maintain their hold on the earth. And this is actually the end of chapter 2, because the rest of the story goes on. Chapter 3 is a prequel to 1 and 2, chapters 1 and 2, and then it jumps around a little bit between characters and how they are dealing with this apocalyptic situation. But again, this is very short. It's probably, I don't know, a minute, maybe? Okay, this is the map of the world. The blood is still fresh enough for his boots to leave a trail behind him as he makes his way through the remains of the city's residential district. The occasional abandoned convenience store slotted between crumbling apartment buildings and elementary schools. Narrow alleys choked with debris from overturned dumpsters and chunks of broken concrete, glass crunching beneath his feet. The roads here are nearly impassable, the blackened skeletons of long-forgotten cars slowly rotting to rust between jagged craters where the asphalt was ripped from the earth below. Following the familiar length of a brick wall, he emerges into the courtyard of a burned-out apartment building, long grown wild. A gray stone fountain pushes out of the chaos like a landmark as tangled vines creep up from the empty base. Bathed in the thin light of a smoke-choked sky, the world seems to be fading more with every passing moment. Sickly yellow greens and muted browns melting into an unending gray. And William crosses a silent lawn that stretches the length of the entire building beneath the gaze of windows like lidless eyes. In a tiny clearing of bare dirt broken by scrubby knots of dead grass, William stumbles to a halt, and the slow crawl of time stops. Dropping heavily to his knees, William tosses his blood-clotted knife to the ground beside his rifle before resting his fingers against the bloody neck, searching for a non-existent pulse. The fragile warmth of Abel's skin already vanishing with the fading day. Reaching for his jaw, he ignores the dull grate of shattered bone as he carefully straightens Abel's head and looks into his too still face. The fine lines of stress from fighting an unwinnable war are smoothed away from the corners of his eyes and his bloodless lips, still half parted as if in the middle of a last breath. He lies in the dirt like the sacrificial victim he never wanted to be. Abel's green eyes stare sightlessly into the stillness of the dying sky as if waiting for a sign. It's the end of the world and the end of Abel. There was never a time that William expected to bear witness to either one.
there every time. Can I stand here? Although it's got to get more steps in. Mark K. Tilson is our next writer and reader, citizen of the Oglala Sioux Tribe.
Actually, it's probably better if people stand like
Is it
where
better
you are.
if we stand here? Okay. Tashi says that the location is better if we stand down here, unless people want to get up and be behind the podium.
I've been saying that sarcastically for like 15 years, and I just can't stop. So I apologize. Wrote a book, It Ain't Over Until We're Smoking Cigars on the Drill Pad, poems from Standing Rock and the Front Lines. Not sure which one to read. Most of these are too depressing.
You haven't been to one of our readings, have you?
Oh, you are all in for a treat that I have found my people at last. Yeah, I think like a lot of folks, I wanted to stay at Standing Rock till the bitter end. And when I left, I was pretty heartbroken. And this poem is about the heartbreak of leaving from one of the greatest resistance camps and moments of Indigenous solidarity I've ever seen in my life. Leaving camp. On the first day, your idea of what home is shatters. The sun sets as you drive past security for the last time. Johnny Cash plays Hurt on the radio. You promise yourself you're coming back, you don't. Week one passes in a strange blur. You miss the songs immediately and the quiet monk-like way the women and their thralling entourage pray down to the river. You miss the way fresh camp singers sing Sundance songs like they're at a powwow. Privacy feels synonymous with loneliness. You don't make eye contact with strangers. Sometimes you stare into their eyes looking for a friend, some camp acquaintance, or you never got to say goodbye to. You imagine every vehicle is following you. Helicopters freak you out. 1 month out, there are people you don't talk to. You feel the surveillance on your skin. You're a danger to them or they to you. You still take too long of showers. The exotic novelty of hot water whenever you want hasn't worn off yet. You find yourself in front of riot cops again and again and again. It all blends together like activist soup. The distinct moments are peppered with the electric metallic taste of tear gas. You still try to raise money for people that are struggling more than you. Some people think you're a hero. If she's cute, you do not correct her. Sometimes you tell stories of braver people than you. You remember not to use their names or any identifying characteristics, times, or locations. You tell so many stories. What am I doing? Nothing matters. You try to patch up things with everyone you pissed off at camp. End this with more friends than enemies. You drink too much. You yell at bartenders, cry at strangers. You overshare on social media, incriminate yourself and friends. You start camp beefs out of boredom, missing the intense feeling of drama. 2 months out, your clothes no longer smell like wood smoke. You take better care of your teeth. You keep moving because moving is the opposite of stagnation. You tell yourself this. 3 months out, you feel warm for the first time. You can feel it in your spine. The chill has finally left. You will not realize you're actually alive. The only bravery you had was willing to die to achieve larger goals. You start thinking ahead. Ideas flood over you. You tell people you're healing. You keep trying to stay honest and real. Fucking Mark. You piss off your friends, grow distant from family. People begin expecting things from you. Your self-righteousness and self-pity becomes indulgent. People call you humble. You laugh in their faces. 4 months out, you don't feel relevant. You exist. You tell people you're healing. You get paid to speak for the first time. You live on floors and couches. You tell people you're healed. Every memory gets immortalized. You no longer have nightmares. You met so many people. I was at Standing Rock, they tell you. Sometimes you remember them, that pack of white girls in your car that turned your ride into some trashy cable drama about things you don't care about. You don't remember names only if they stood out. You don't feel in charge of your life at times. You move on strange currents. Forget every day that you need to become stronger. You forgive yourself for shitty behavior too often. Sometime during the summer, you realize you're used to sleeping in a bed and not talking to people for days on end. You slowly figure out you don't trust anybody. That you can't recall the last time you actually trusted someone. You run into camp friends and cling to them like life rafts. You collide with their stories, and you learn so much more about what you missed. All these other fights and struggles pull you with their gravity. You don't really care. You're actually okay. You're safe. You often don't feel safe, but you are safe. You sometimes dream of camp. You will delete this later.
Oh, very nice.
One more. This one's short. This one's a work in progress. We should have workshopped it. Sorry.
We are now. Kim, set your timer again. Oh, I know.
This is under a minute.
Wild Oglala.
Yeah, like at actions, sometimes people take on certain roles, and you kind of be like, oh, I'm not going to be arrested today, and you're like, no, I'm going to throw it down, and over time with the campaign, they kind of realize it's not in your control anymore. This was inspired by the continuing pipeline fight down in Louis La Vie, in the swamps of Louisiana and the bayous. Going sunset. The color scheme was from a brighter era, a time of arrestables and non, a demarcation about roles and who took on work that needed to continue after the action and who was committed to going in. After a while, the fear of the police in jail lessened, just becomes an omnipresent hazard that goes with the territory. We laugh and smile as our numbers dwindled into the same weary, bug-bitten faces, blues, orange, and reds. But like artists painting their palette on a spectrum, you have your wishes and your intent, but acknowledge the unknown factor that says shit happens. Today, I am sunset, burnt orange and fiery red, ready for whatever may come.
Our next reader is Nick Estes, who is from the Lower Brule Sioux tribe.
Heard you before. So this is a piece titled Lakota Grandmas were the first to take back Mount Rushmore. It's excerpts from three excerpts from a longer piece. A patch of moss grows at the back of Teddy Roosevelt's skull. Lizzie Fasthorse noted how different Mount Rushmore looked from behind. Further back was a small hollow of pines that made a charming campground, where she and a small group of Lakota women pitched tents. It was idyllic, and the women felt a sense of freedom they had never felt before. There was another comfort. The top of the mountain was the only place the Lakota grandmother didn't have to look at those large, pale faces that were blasted and chiseled into Haisapa, the Black Hills, desecrations of a revered spiritual landscape for Lakota people. Roosevelt's gaze was permanently fixed like a sentry towards the east slope of the mountain, where there was a concealed footpath, which the women first used to scale the so-called Shrine of Democracy during a mid-July thunderstorm in 1970. Perhaps it was the flashes of lightning that blinded Roosevelt and unsuspecting park rangers from seeing them, winding their way through a maze of large boulders and ponderosa pines. To the women, the lightning was a blessing and the elemental sign of Crazy Horse. We knew he was with us, Fast Horse said. So the women gave the peak a new name, Crazy Horse Mountain, in honor of the famed Oglala warrior who was a defiant symbol of American Indian resistance. There was an earthlier explanation, however, for the women's sense of invisibility. We're forbidden people, Fast Horse surmised years later, held down since the first U.S. president. She and two other Lakota women had taken over one of the most visited places in the United States that attracted almost 2 million visitors a year, but save a few frustrated park rangers who seemed unable or unwilling to catch the Lakota elder and her friends, no one seemed to care. There was no media coverage. It was as if it hadn't happened. The women had put themselves on top of one of the most iconic landmarks symbolizing American exceptionalism and shouted their demands to the world who was listening. This is another excerpt from this piece. The border between the city and reservation was fluid for someone like Lizzie Fast Horse. To her, it was all Lakota land, and she would go wherever she pleased. But the economic conditions were such that living in the city or the reservation was more a matter of survival than choice. Fast Horse was born on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1904 and raised by her grandparents in a one-room log cabin that had both a dirt floor and a dirt roof. She learned to read and write in English at a Catholic boarding school, completing the 8th grade. But Fast Horse credited her real teachers as the relatives who visited her grandparents, smoking the chanupa and sharing the memories of the time when they were a free people, walking among the now storied figures of Lakota history such as Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. They were the last generation of Lakotas with a living memory of freedom. There was hardly any work, Fast Horse said, of reservation life, so she and her 7 children and her husband got used to eating oatmeal 3 times a day without milk. Desperate and hungry, they sold what little they had to buy food, finally making the decision in 1952 to move to Rapid City, where jobs for Indians were still scarce and, if available, were in effect lower paying than those of their white counterparts. City life was a different kind of colonialism. Indians were everywhere, but rarely visible. The only working Indian you're going to find in Rapid City is behind the curtains or behind the door, Muriel Wakazu described off-reservation employment conditions. Wakazu and her friend Lizzie Fast Horse had similar backgrounds. Wakazu was born and raised in the Rosebud Reservation and attended Catholic Mission School. An untreated childhood injury to her knee left her permanently disabled, preventing her from attending school and acquiring certain employment. The poverty and discrimination her family of 6 children faced in Rapid City led her husband to drink, an experience that helped Wakazu, who had never touched this stuff, she said, form a distinct class consciousness at the intersections of urban Indianness, ability, and gender. At an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, Wakazu once heard a white woman describe her husband's hard drinking as turning her into a shell of a person. I've got 3 shells to crawl out of, Wakazu responded to the woman's story, who according to her had only one shell to crawl out of as a white housewife. Wakazu's first shell was that she was an Indian, and it's awful hard in the city. The second was that she was a handicapped person. And lastly, she was a woman. I'll just finish this. It was when she went on relocation with her daughter to California that she became a seasoned political activist. In 1967, she moved to San Francisco to work at the Indian Center, represented by 97 different tribes, where she befriended the center's director, Lyman Brightman, a former Star College running back, born on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. The Bay Area was teeming when Brightman recruited Wakazu to join the United Native Americans, an organization formed by Brightman in San Francisco to promote indigenous unity and decolonization. And Fast Horse had turned to Wakazu for help in organizing the Mount Rushmore takeover. A month before, Wakazu printed handbills stating the group's intentions. She and Fast Horse went door to door in Rapid City's Lakota neighborhoods and on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, letting people know what was about to happen. But by August, the protest hadn't gotten the attention it needed, so Fast Horse phoned Wakazu. And this is the end. 2 years after troopers dragged Lizzie Fast Horse down from Mount Rushmore, cuffed so tightly to her 9-year-old granddaughter that she bled from the wrist, she was now directing young women in a makeshift kitchen at Wounded Knee. They had just served hard-boiled eggs and oatmeal, orange juice, and coffee to the nighttime AIM sentries. FBI and U.S. Marshals unleashed nightly barrages of bullets and tracers from military-grade assault rifles and machine guns against AIM members, armed with wooden clubs, few rusted hunting rifles, and an iconic AK-47 smuggled from the jungles of Vietnam. Now, how did Crazy Horse put it? Fast Horse asked the group, "Oh yes, it's a good day to die, but no Indians are going to die today."
And our next writer to read is Linda Goey from the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. Lenico? Do you have something? Sorry about that.
COVID time was time for me to do some writing. And so a lot of these drafts that I have here are they need some work, but they're what I wanted to share tonight was life before the dams. So I'll just read a couple of them. I listened for the cranes. October 28th, 2021. I'm under the celestial canopy of love today, and I'm reminded that I am. Working out here pretty much the entire day, painting fountains on those beautiful but windy days, with colorful autumn leaves rolling across the yet green grass. Overhead, the cranes calling as they sail south. Their flight and their calling move me to tears. Scenes like today, unexpectedly uplifting, make me feel such gratitude for the beauty of that flock, winging their way homeward again. They stir in me an unexplainable yearning, yet I stare up in wonder at that sound. How comforting and inspirationally moving. Yesterday I said, unexplainable. So last night I prayed for discernment. And today I know why the cranes calling in the azure skies of autumn always bring me to tears. I'll tell you this. It was on a day such as this that I was taken away from my home on the river as a very young child to go to the Federal Indian Boarding School. I, standing in my tears on the front steps of our house, was holding a small luggage bag, waiting for the black station wagon to arrive to carry me away from home, away from my Unchi, away from my pets, and as clearly as the cranes calling, I hear her voice. Shh, listen, shh, don't cry. Listen to the cranes flying overhead. Today they're leaving their home, but they will return just like you will. They will be gone before the snow comes in winter. But when the snows melt and you see the green grass coming up through the thawed ground, you will return home just like them. So don't cry. Wait to hear them, and you will know. The cranes always return home, and you will too. What Unchi didn't say was that we would lose our home forever, and no cranes could foretell our future. Only call out to us their promise, perhaps a promise of another home. Living under the canopy of love, to know that I am, yes, that I am still who I am. Despite so many losses, I still listen for the cranes. Flying fish. It was solstice when choke cherries had already turned and were ripening quickly under the hot summer sun. Choke cherry boughs are so heavy south of No Heart Trail that they're nearly touching the ground, reported my cousin Aaron when he returned from his having ridden the trail down to the river looking for runaway saddle horses. There was no need to say anything more on that subject to set the women in our household busy gathering buckets and tubs, canvas tarps, and fixing a picnic lunch to take us plum and choke cherry picking. Aaron, go bring the team up to the house. They're still harnessed from getting water. There's no telling when your uncle will return with the flatbed, my mother called, slathering homemade mayonnaise and peanut butter on bread slices as she made sandwiches for the afternoon outing. Meanwhile, water jugs were filled and axe and hoe were taken out to the buckboard just in case we encountered a rattlesnake. The sky was summertime blue with only a sliver of clouds on the distant western horizon when we left the yard, headed for the north end of the valley trail below our house. Within a couple of hours, Aaron stopped the team on the bottom shelf above a cove, where we often fished and unhooked them from the backboard. He staked them near the ridge, just above where the grove sprawled across, so they could graze. Back at the buckboard, we had unloaded our choke cherry picking gear and were soon not far, but from where I was picking, I heard it plump, 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 plump berries hitting the bottom of Unchi and Mother's lard buckets. With my left arm through my lard bucket handle, I pulled clusters of choke cherries down from the low-hanging boughs, stuffed half of them into my mouth and the rest in the bucket. We all worked under the blazing sun, silently picking and eating while Unchi, Auntie, and my mother softly visited. We kept picking, though we had noticed that the breeze from the south carried little bursts of chilly gusts heavy with humidity. Tiny black flies began biting our arms and ankles. Small swarms of gnats hovered over like gauzy plumes over the grass. Soon they were rising up with the breeze and sticking to our sticky arms and face, biting us mercilessly. Halfway up the hill, the horses were restless. Flint, the big black gelding, began to nicker and paw the ground, throwing powdery dust into the air. Aaron noticed the commotion and started walking up to settle them down. But he didn't have much success. Instead, Flint reared up and started pawing the air. Aaron slipped on the grass and fell to the ground, trying to avoid getting hit by the big horse's hoofs. Almost immediately, before Aaron could stand up, both Flint and Fanny bolted, pulling up the stakes that had been screwed into the dry ground, and on a full-out lope, they disappeared over the other opposite side of the ridge. Aaron looked back over the hill at where we stood watching all that had just happened when he pointed across to the river. Clouds had flattened out into the shape of an anvil to the west, and suddenly little bursts of cold breeze began to blow. Soon the tree boughs were shaking, and I lost the grip hold on one bough. "Stay down there. Looks like a tornado coming up across the river and headed our direction," he shouted. Then whatever he said after that was caught up in the wind and inaudible. We shoved our buckets, dishpans, and tubs under the low flat plum bush and threw the canvas tarp over it. As he ran across towards us, he pointed to the direction of the river. This time he shouted, "Hurry! Let's get down there into the grove." He and Mother grabbed Unchi by the arm and headed for the grove, while Auntie and I started up the hill in the direction of the horses, where they had disappeared over the ridge. I will never know, but that's what we did. With Auntie holding my hand, halfway up the hill, I turned to look back and saw that what looked like a long gray snake hanging from the sky. It appeared to be walking across on the water in slow oscillating motion. We ran as fast as we could, topped the ridge, and with heels digging into the hillside, we headed for the gulch below the ridge. Clouds overhead looked like swirling, dirty sheep fleece. Now the fierce wind gusts whipped my hair about wildly, as it repeatedly did the same with the grass, first jerking it up, then slapping it flat to the ground. We kept running until we reached the gulch and the floodplain washout. It slid down into the deep crevice just as rain pelted us. Further down the gulch, I saw the two restless horses prancing about with their heads held high, trying to see above the embankment. I ducked down close to the ground and prayed hard that the gray snake from the sky that I had seen walking across the river and soon to reach us would veer off in a direction different. When suddenly, almost as quickly as it had appeared, the black snake broke up, flattened out, and disappeared into a northeasterly direction, along with the wind and a little rain shower that had hardly dampened the earth. Auntie and I looked at one another with astonishment. The quiet stillness was eerie, but a strange muffled flapping sound came up from above us on the grassland. We quickly climbed up the side of the gulch to see what was making all the noise, and that's when, to our surprise, we saw a amazing sight. Fish were flopping across on the grass. Over the rise of the ridge, carrying walleye in each hand, we walked as fast as we could to rejoin Uchi and Mother, who were laughing and squealing, trying to capture as many fish as they could in the canvas tarps. I'll never forget that summer afternoon when we went plum and choke cherry picking and ended up bringing home a canvas tarp full of fish that fell from the sky. Our next writer and reader is Christopher Bordeaux, a citizen of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, who has the best spider puns.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all here. I haven't written anything. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't hear me. Really haven't written anything over these past years, especially these past 3 years, this terrible, horrible time. So I'll go back to what I had written some years ago, and it's a bunch of short stories about fishing and hunting. And this is part of the stories of we were fishing. We were fishing for northern pike. 3 cousins, 2 of my brothers and myself. We were at boarding school dam, now called Antelope Lake. We were driven there, dropped off by my dad next to the spillway. He left us snacks, water, and Kool-Aid. He told us he'd be back in a couple hours. We were all very young, but we had done this before. It was a hot, scorching, muggy, not quite miserable early July afternoon. We fished for whatever was biting, mostly casting plugs or lures or using worms we had brought with us. We were fishing for about an hour and as always got hungry. We started eating the snacks. We were finishing eating and desperately swallowing a light lunch of dry Comanches, drier salting crackers. And who could resist warm Kool-Aid, warm water to drink? Sure missed those lunches. As we were digesting and sitting around, we were thinking that in about a half hour or so, the big pike would start tearing things up. My dad always liked to say that. They'd start feeding. And as we like to call it, it was pike time. We had no bait or bait fish, usually large 6 to 8 inch minnows, which we call shiners or chubs. And we would usually fish on the Little White River. We needed these to feed large pike, but we had not done so this time, fish for bait. So we did what we always did in this situation. We looked at the oldest and he said, let's try the spillway to fish for bait fish. Since we were already on the spillway side of the dam, we all clambered down to the tailwaters and fervently started fishing for bait, small sunfish, which was illegal. But as I said, we were very young and didn't know it was illegal. We tied small hooks, small sinkers, and live earthworms, which, as I said, we brought with us for bait for the sunfish. We found a medium-sized, wide-mouthed quart mason jar in the weeds. It was just big enough for the right-sized sunfish for bait to keep them alive. We filled it with water. We needed them to be alive when it came time to feed them to the big pike. We had about 3 that were appropriate size and were quite pleased with ourselves. We were taking our time fishing for bait because, as I said, it was hot and it was July. From the top of the dam behind us, we heard sliding footsteps as if something large was ascending too quickly, and we were immediately enveloped by an enormous shadow. Well, as I said, we were young. It felt like we were enveloped. Anyway, we all froze in July, turning our heads cautiously and slowly around, peering up to see what doom was approaching. Glaring down at us was a very, very, very large man. Short, blonde, cropped hair. Large, muscular, bursting out of his white t-shirt arms. Even bigger, muscular legs. Barely fitting into his tan cutoffs. He was carrying what seemed to us the tiniest rod and reel with an only tinier tackle box. This guy was enormous, to say the least, and was approaching slowly with glaring eyes that seemed to pierce into our young, vulnerable souls. Still frozen in our spots and waiting for a tongue lashing or something worse, we waited in terror. Then he spoke in the most trembling, highest, squeakiest voice you ever heard. And he said, "Can I have some of those sunfish, please?" We were all staring at him with mouth agape when the oldest of the brothers with a sad and older brotherly, trying to suppress laughter voice, quietly of course, "Give him the sunfish." We obeyed and turned over our hard-caught bait. He squeakily replied, "Thank you," accepted the sunfish, jar and all, headed up the spillway. We waited for him to reach the top of the dam, over and out of sight, as we all fell to the ground, holding our bellies as very young boys who had just had this crap scared out of them, and laughed until we cried. After we settled down and continued to fish for more bait, someone would always say, "Can I have some of those?" My stomach hurt for days after that. We all wondered if he caught any pike. We were fishing for pike.
I
Technically, time's up, you guys short.
it's good.
We were fishing for pike. This is a story I had heard many times over the years. The first time I heard it was from a very reliable source who witnessed firsthand because she was there, my mom. The adventure happened one sizzling hot, muggy Sunday afternoon, clear skies on the 6th of July, years ago, ages ago. Mom, Dad, and my oldest brother Joe and a relative Mike were fishing for pike at boarding school dam and Antelope Dam, and it's next to the Antelope Community in Mission, South Dakota. It was called boarding school dam because it was a degree or so above 100, little after 1 p.m. when the sun almost directly over with no shade on the shore. They were fishing as usual with 2 poles apiece, except Mom, who was using one. The fishing rules are you can have 2 poles in the water. Usually use one for bait and one for casting lures. The bait poles would be short stout poles about 5.5 feet and with level wind reels, flugers or South Bends, a 30-pound test braided line. That would for live bait. Others for casting would be 6-foot or longer spin casting reels, spin casting like Zepco's 404, a 20-pound monofilament line. They had been fishing for live bait and artificial lures since early morning, and at first they caught a few northern pike, about 8 or 10 pounds apiece. Things slowed down around 10 a.m., but at the same time, nothing was nibbling nor biting, not even horse flies, nor deer flies. Joe and Mike decided to drive into town, Mission, to get lunch and bring it back. Mission's about 2 miles from the dam. They figured the pike were going to start feeding right when the temperature started lower, which they did. By that time, everybody went to live bait. 3 poles with 2 poles in the water, and my mom was 1 pole. 7 poles in the water, each with live bait. They were large shiners, like I said before, 5 or 6 inches long, and with treble hooks, 35-pound steel leader, and 30-pound braided line. They all had a big floater, people call them bobbers, but floaters. And to hold the large shiners, they were hooked about 5 or 6 feet deep, no sinkers, just a line and a treble hook. And they spaced them out so there was room in between so they could swim around. Joe and Mike had got about no more than a half a mile away, just crossing the dam itself. Each of the large floaters started moving in different directions, 7 different directions, slowly but steadily being pulled underwater, which means pike. Mom said everything was a blur. Dad set the hook on the first pike. Then, as Mom said, all hell broke loose. Dad started running to each pole, back and forth on the shore, picking up a pole, setting the hook, dropping the pole, rushing to grab another, set the hook, 6 frantic trips back and forth, back and forth. She doesn't remember how many trips in all. He said after a while he wasn't even reeling in the line, but just grabbing the poles, running up on the bank until the pike came to shore, dropping the pole, grab another one. At one time he had 1 pole under his arm and 1 on his hand and yelling at her for help. I asked her, well, what were you doing? She said, I was fighting my own huge pike and screaming and laughing at the same time. She said when Dad would get 1 pike out of the water, another would flip-flop back in the water. He was running back and forth, trying to get all the monstrous pike on shore. It took about 20 or 30 minutes. A few times the pole would be dragged into the water and Dad had to go in after that. The next thing my mom remembered was my brother and Mike coming back with the lunch. And there were large pike flopping all over the place. Mom laughing, Dad just sitting in his chair with a smile and completely worn out. Each pike weighed about 15 or 20 pounds. Mom said, we have pictures of those pike and they were really good eating. think I saw those pictures once, but they're lost now to history and time. We didn't have a catch and release in those days. We ate what we could or gave them to the community on our way home. I told my mom they must have fed the whole community. She just laughed and said, I think so. We were fishing for play.
So now you have to follow that. The next reader is Jessica Garcia Fritz from Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe.
It's tough to follow, Chris. I'm in between, I can step over here. I'm in between writing right now. I've got this to a point where I'm calling it a proposal for a potentially titled manuscript book called Legal Architecture. So part one is a preface to the preface. For a while, I've been thinking about a proposal for a manuscript. In past writings, I have written for scientific committees in architecture, construction, and construction history. Most of the journals and committees have origins in European or Western architectural practices and are mostly made up of men who are obsessed with steel, concrete, and iron. The writing was a form of technical writing held to standards by those committees. A lot of their work heightened the building arts or how building technologies intersect with economic, social, cultural, and political conditions. So this intersection is entangled in material-based power structures that are shaped by instruments of architectural practice, contracts, drawings, and specifications that construct the built environment. Looking at construction practices throughout the Americas, and more specifically, the role of specifications in the United States, I noticed a shift in the practice of specification writing alongside what a lot of architectural writing has dubbed Western expansion. Specifications, they offer a written format for translating the organization and sequence of work on a building site from architect to contractor. Drawing sets and models describe physical work in a place and build outcomes. Specifications direct work through the selection of building systems and materials. Today, they're viewed as one of the most mundane administrative tasks in building design. They're not seen as sexy, but specification writing is a political act, and in its most violent form is closely tied to territories for material extraction and land dispossession. In 2020, I wrote an article, The Specification as an Instrument for Colonizing Oceti Sakowin Lands. I don't know how I feel about the title anymore. When it was written, I had to rewrite it after I forgot who the audience was, namely men obsessed with steel, iron, and concrete, who were most definitely not familiar with Oceti Sakowin lands. So this is not for that audience. The next part is a preface or a proposal. The first pine cut in the state of Minnesota was in 1818 at Rum River and was used in the construction of Fort Snelling. The fort being sufficiently advanced for occupancy by 1822, a sawmill was built under supervision of the officers at the fort at the Falls of St. Anthony near Minneapolis. This excerpt from George W. Hotchkiss's 1898 publication, History of the Lumber and Forest Industry of the Northwest, establishes an origin for the white pine lumber industry in the state of Minnesota, even before declared statehood in 1858. And from 1805 to 1868, 34 treaties were negotiated between the U.S. and Oceti Sakowin Oyates. But as treaty making abruptly ended with the 1871 Indian Appropriations Act, new forms of political agreements further expanded the U.S. colonial grip. Though the seemingly empty territories had been surveyed and defined by 1871, the spaces had only started to be resettled. And simultaneously, the architecture and construction community in the U.S. had embarked on a radical restructuring of agreements through organizations that govern the social, economic, and labor culture of building sites. Specifications materialize as tools of authorship for the emerging profession of architecture, and as technical documents, specs allowed architects to control building sites from a distance through the selection or disregard of certain types of work and materials. So as political agreements, specifications tied architects to the vast territories needed for material extraction and production. At the building and material scales, specifications became a political tool for resettling and extracting materials from stolen land. In the mid-19th century, some of the first specifications written in the U.S. were by architects who designed wood frame buildings. These were largely distributed through building manuals and pattern books written for houses, as well as lumberman guides. And one book was George E. Woodward and Edward G. Thompson's Woodward's National Architect, published in 1869, 1 year after the ratification of the Fort Laramie Treaty. Based in New York, Woodward and Thompson understood the role of specification writing and maintaining control of building sites from a distance. In the introduction, they write, quote, "The forms of specifications given are such that they may be adapted to any of the designs so that full and final estimates can be obtained from local builders. They will also serve as hints for the preparation of specifications for any class of dwelling houses. Quality was interpretable, as classification systems were non-existent and the species of wood was left to the local market availability. Contractors were given agency to choose the quality and type of work depending on their location." Just got a little bit more. As political agreements, treaties and specifications are both accountable for the creation of material territories. Specifications create an initial need for territories and the raw materials they potentially possess. The increased selection of certain materials and products expand territories to meet demand. The evolution of white pine specifications from the mid-19th century to early 20th century further supports this connection. Generic language written in pattern books such as Woodward's National Architect of 1869 indicate unknown territories for extraction and the production of lumber. In the book, directives written for houses intended to resettle newly acquired territories in the U.S. offered substitutes in the absence of materials like white pine. Later specifications, written in the early 20th century by institutions such as the White Pine Bureau, which is located in St. Paul, indicate a shift in precision. As territorial borders and locations solidified, so too did points of extraction, sawmill construction for processing, and railroad expansion to move the material. Precise specifications advanced specific material territories. And the effects of this shift are still being played out in current architectural and construction practices. Contract documents agreed upon by architects, contractors, and owners almost always name a single proprietary entity. Considering the Fort Laramie Treaty, and as millions of dollars have sat and gathered interest in the BIA bank account after the 1980 United States versus Sioux Nation of Indians decision, I wonder how any new construction is allowed to proceed in HSAPA, given the explicit and implicit language of ownership in these contracts. I have nothing more to offer than the question at the moment, which makes for a pretty terrible preface and an incomplete proposal, but I'm happy to share this work with Oak Lake, and thank you all for listening.
That was amazing.
So our next writer is Tate Walker. And I had the pleasure of watching Tate performed I do produce a sexy storytelling show out of Edmonton. It's usually on stage, and then with COVID we went online, and we did a show last spring. Yep. It's called TV Confessions, and Tate did an erotic, hilarious food piece. It was a total highlight, so I'm so excited. I love food.
Is that the one we goaded you into reading at Festival of Books?
Do these guys need to leave? It's only as dirty as you want it to be.
Yeah.
All right. Actually, I'm really going to hit you with some sacredness tonight, so just prepare yourself. This is my auto reply to all the folks who hit me up at the very end of October to ask if I can do XYZ during Native American Heritage Week. Are you available tomorrow? So this is called Happy Native American Heritage Month. I'm only native on federal holidays between the hours of 1 and 3 p.m., so stop calling me about my Res Rides extended warranties. I snatch crystals and dreamcatcher tattoos from Urban Outfitter employees because, goddammit, Custer's eyes for this. I have a face more John Smith than Matawaka, but the fact that I know Matawaka's name gives me authentic and automatic brown points like white bread getting that lightly toasted treatment. Twitter asks if I prefer Native American or American Indian, and that's when I whip out my Sierra Club issued authenticity card. It's a certificate for you, which incidentally is also my coffee house punch card. One more stamp to that mythic tax-free life, baby. This is the first step toward reclamation and the first line of my land acknowledgement. Happy Native American Heritage You can pray now. This is another really sacred poem, because everyone always asks, what do you think, who are you voting for? So, it's called The Native Vote. I want a Lakota for president. I want someone who can make something from nothing, like fry bread or peace, for president. I want someone who's been owned by a res dog for president. I want someone who makes a plate for their elders first for president. I want plus-size anti-energy for president. I want someone who's been held accountable by their tribe and grandma for president. I want someone who knows hashtag land back is praxis, not philosophy for president. I want someone humble enough to use spirit beads in their work for president. I want someone who's smudgy, not judgy for president. I want someone who values both urban life and red life for president. I want someone willing to stand face to face with government agents in defense of their land and water relatives for president. That's you, Mark. I want someone who lives Mitaki Oyasa for president. I want a treaty defender for president. I want someone who spent time in an IHS waiting room for president. I want someone who understands language is culture is language for president. I want an unhyphenated two-spirit for president. I want someone who values community over bootstraps for president. I want someone who doesn't feed any metaphorical wolves inside themselves for president. I want someone who doesn't hang or tattoo dream catchers for president. I want someone with a double-digit cousin count for president. I want someone brave enough to reject blood quantum for president. I want a merciless Indian savage for president. A new line for today, I want that indigenous creature for president. It's new news today. I want a Lakota for president. And that's inspired by Zoe Leonard's I Want a Dyke for president. You guys love the taco box?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Thought she could see me later.
Tate's like, oh, I wanted to read that just for all the elders. I was like, you got to do it. That was at the Festival of Cultures. Here, I got to sit down for this. Get all serious.
There's dishes over there for some of you too. All right. Again, this is only as dirty as you want it to be, Nick. Just kidding. All right. I like tacos. Okay. I want you. An ache deep in my core drives me to collect the pieces of you scattered around like raw promises, waiting for me to feast. I lick my lips, salivating at the thought of your splintered fragments coming together and reforming into something beyond both of us. I come undone, and I work my fingers through a mound of your sticky recipe, kneading every part of you, letting you rise just high enough. Ooh, it's getting hot in here. You like it rough. A slap here, a pull there, tugging and pressing and stoking the fire and stretching you limits until gently, so gently, I lay you flat, not to rest, but to burn. You ride for me, Sizzling with expectation, I wait, impatient and hungry for you. It is ecstasy to watch your hills and valleys slick and glistening and drowning in the pop song of anointed bluebirds. Ooh, we're not finished. Just as you're about to combust, I flip you and start the mad process over. Your body undulates for me, and suddenly your hot brown perfection is ready. And so is my tongue. Someone knows what I'm talking about. Sometimes you play around with honey when you're feeling soft and sweet and warm, and sometimes we get wild like rice. But tonight is only meat. Let us experiment on your commod bod. Dairy cheese that melts in my mouth, into my hands. Round in all the right places, your lovely lumps taste so good, and I moan your name, thanking the ancestors for this gift that will forever sit upon my soul and thighs. You are my deliciously undeniable fried red. It was inspired, it's the non-shocked one, inspired by last night's discussion of ghosts and all that. I have this here. Right, yeah. It's called, hopefully it's not too deep, but after all that, trigger warning, I guess. Alright, daytime death delivery. She flies into my path. I could run, but she'd just catch me unawares down the road, this winged hearse with her side beak. Our locked eyes deliver the death notices she carries. Someone will make their journey soon. Maybe 3 will. I try to look away from her gray shroud, but it's noon, and I'm staring at a scary story come true. I've been warned about you, huh? Don't look at owls. They carry messages we don't want. A red notification you can't delete. Look away, look away, look away. She's a choking hazard, a train wreck, a beautiful dried flower falling apart at your touch. She's the pain behind your damned eyes, the tightening of your third-degree throat, the anxious buzz of your hornet-filled gut. And it's all happening in those unblinking headlamps of hers, freezing me in place. Tag, you're it. Who, I ask. Who, she agrees.
Mabel Peacock is next from the Yankton Sage Tribe.
I put my number in the bathroom.
I called it, but there was no
Dark.
Hi, I'm April. Wow, that was really great. And something coincidentally talked about beautiful creature. My cousin called me on my way back, dropping off my mom. She was like, "Hello, you beautiful creature." What?
She was already beating it, you know it.
Yeah, I'll tell you about it later. So hard act to follow. When I introduced myself yesterday, I know a lot of people weren't here, but I talked about writing for a really long time, that I've been writing poetry, and recently a lot of friends of mine have encouraged me to put my poetry together into a book, like a collection. And so that's something I'm working on, and in the process of that, I've pulled out a lot of papers. I've been also helping my mom clean out her house, and we pulled out a lot of papers of mine from when I was younger in grade school. And so I have been writing poems for a really, really long time, and through school, and then also just on the side, just in my free time, I wrote poems, and I found a lot of those. And some of them are really childish and cliche, but I just wanted to read, I guess, something that I might, a few pieces that I want to appear in the book, a collection of work. So the first poem that we could find of mine was written, and it had 3rd grade on the back, so, and it's a haiku, and it's called Fall. Leaves fall and crackle, they crumble under footfalls. And then another one, the first, so it'll be a night of firsts from me. I'll read a lot of poems that had a first to something, so that was one of the first ones we could find. And then this next one was the first poem I had published, and it was published in the by the National Library of Poetry. There was a contest, and I think it was in a newspaper that my dad found, and he wanted me to send this poem in because I had written it for my uncle, my dad's brother, when he passed away. And he was just a really funny guy. He was loud, and he had this laugh that was just like cascading, like hey, 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 hey. and I just loved him. I loved listening to him. I loved that laugh, and so I really wanted to express my sorrow. And so it's a rhyming poem. It's the only rhyming poem I've ever written. So here goes. It's called Last Goodbye. A tear trickled down my face as I went up to play Amazing Grace. Memories passed through my mind of happy days that were left behind. The smiles, the laughs, the jokes and tears that were bound together by all the years. Even the times he sat me down and scolded me with a creasing frown. An uncle, elder, and a friend, a person on whom I could depend. As my violin rang out the song, I wondered how life can get so wrong. Sorrows come like falling stars, unexpected and from afar. My eyes turned glassy as I cried, with my family standing by my side. The guns fire and taps was played, and my heart it tore, it frayed. Then as they laid him in the ground, there were no words that could be found to express my sorrow in any way. We know not the time or day. That was, I don't know how old I was. I remember it was my 5th grade year when I first went to Chamberlain. And then I have to get out of this one. And so then the first poem I wrote at Oak Lake was an assignment by Elizabeth Cookland. She was our mentor that year, and she assigned us to write about hands. So this is my piece, and it's called Hands. I dream about the color of badlands after the rain, and how the sun begins to bake the clay, dry and crisp on the exterior, but still soft and smooth to the touch. Like your skin with dusty furrows, smudged with the clay of a long day, nails ground down to artful calluses, as thoughtfully thick as the soul. And hand to hand I dream about that first electric spark fingertips can send, straight down the spine to land with the flutter of soft wings, just behind the navel. What comfort one touch, fashioned with technique and toil, can give the stolid. I dream of a solid and precisely strengthened hand, coveting the smallness of mine. And then I just wanted to read a poem that I wrote. I never read it at Oak Lake, but I read it. I wrote it during Oak Lake. I think Gordon Henry was our mentor that year, and I never really finished it, but I'll end with this one. It's a little different. It's about my experience living in Chamberlain on the north side on J Street, and just some of the crazy things that happened. It was just kind of, I drive by there now, and I'm like, wow, that's really, yeah. How did we even live there? But, okay, it's called Cats. Curiosity killed the cat, so maybe I died way back when I said I do. Not to you, but to everything that happened next in the land of sacrifice, sacrilege, served up like mush on the plate I ate with satisfaction, tongue licking clean the flesh of the me I used to see in the mirror, the cool slinkiness of my former self, an impish, arrogant mixture of knavish wonder. And when I was done cleansing and preening, I stretched into my newness and replaced all the window screens, torn, tattered, curving up at the edges were the fingers of thieves and lost souls, trying to find something pulled, ripped, squirmed through and found this home, locked up, and never a clever cat alive can tell the tale of these walls and windows, washed pure, understand. So when he bumbled up naked, shivering to my stoop, he must have wondered through his drunken haze about the warning of these locks and bolts, meaty hands slipping over a yielding knob, raised and banging, he shuffled back surprised, when I so silently and nimbly sprang the window lock, making it pop and swish, as I whipped open my view to peer upon his wicked bareness. I uttered, beware, I ate myself, now what's left may devour you too.
So we have two more readers potentially. Abigail Young, do you want to read? I was told you might. Assistant Lockton Oyate, and I think our youngest Oak Lake writers. All right.
This isn't going to be as good as all the other pieces tonight. We love you and you're awesome.
Yeah, ditto.
I just put this together in a room, and it's about a little bit about experience this weekend that I've had. 16 faces with fluorescent minds, superiors in thought and weighted with knowledge. Passing names in days of the old, we are welcomed like old relatives. With fists of fear, we share our lives like blended horizons, our accounts carried on with every new moon, the bittersweet memories and the blissful childhoods. While keeping our hidden, expired, and subdued past silent, we expose realism on every distressed subject. Memory after memory, our painful ordeals remain untouched by sensibility, too raw to tell and too raw to relive. Few stories are rarely shared. Impacted by history, in the present, we dwell on the thought of unity and convergence with designs and fantasies of everlasting peace. We share only ourselves with each captivated mind surrounding the room. We find our tranquil escapes, and the youth reacts in ways unknown. Collective minds conscious of failures and accomplishments, they know none. They emote their ambitions. Soaking in every speech with undivided attention, they reveal their compassions at each detail. We can anticipate our stories will remain.
That is great. Very brave. So Chris Pexa, are you Spirit Lake Sioux Tribe? Who's going to come close the night out?
Oh. I was going to peace out, trying to get away without reading. I still might if I can't forget. So I was going to read something funny, and I was scribbling all day to try and finish something, which is a ghost story, like a weird mashup about Leeds, South Dakota. It's the Homestake Gold Mine, ghosts, and the deep physics experiments that are going on down there, and the new sort of venture to continue mining gold, to reopen gold exploration. But and it was funny, but I didn't finish it. It's not like a funny topic, but I didn't finish it. So instead I'm going to read something like really super old, not the third grade or the second grade. I did write a poem in the third grade, but I was plagiarized. Sorry, Mom, if you're watching. I confess, I told the truth. So this is actually, these are just a couple of excerpts from a manuscript, a book about my grandma who passed away 15 years ago. And it's really about imagining like her journey, her afterlife, and imagining it as kind of escape from mission school that she attended as a child. She was forced to go to as a child. And I realized as I was writing it that it was a kind of So there's a character called Girl, and who does a lot of weird things. She shrinks herself down into the size of like a marble. She turns blue. She rides on the back of her dog. She encounters strange people. So I'll skip the sort of introduction maybe. Now we have the introduction. Girl could not remember her name. How long had it been? Let me just say too that the book will end. I haven't been able to finish it because I'm a language learner of Decolonizing. And the ending that I envisioned was that she would escape. Girl would remember her name, and she would speak. She would only Decolonizing. So I think that's the essence of the entire manuscript. Girl could not remember her name. How long had it been since she had forgotten? But she could remember being beneath the pine floorboards of her cousin's house, when she felt the cool July dirt between her toes, and getting sleepy, felt herself become small and blue and humid as the ground. It was when she heard the gray man, his jacket, the hair of sheep and moist with his constant searching, towing the floorboards above her, and wondering if the hollow he felt in the arch of his right foot could hide a little girl from this kind of schoolroom justice. It was when Girl turned herself into a small blue stone the size of a shooter mark. Decided she had had enough of school, at least until the locusts had quit their buzzing and the air started to cool and turned to sweet boredom. It signaled the start of another year of classes. The most secret thing in her life was to be bad and alone and blue. Like a star, she thought. How many nights from her dormitory bed she had watched the sky wheel clockwise in time to the creaking of the hot water in the pipes. The hunter chased the North Star amorously. The bear confused the hunter with promises of redemption. The sisters were silent and wise like her own sisters. They were silent and had pomegranate lips, and when they moved them, the whole earth made room for the secrets they kept. They were beautiful and fragrant, and even the priests, those priests, had trouble forgetting them. But today, she would be blue. From her usual height of a short adult, Girl would shrink to a needle's length, and her color would make even a star jealous. And then there's another scene, I'll just read one more. She meets a bunch of hobos. I realize people don't use the word hobos anymore.
Have you been to Brookings? Hobo days? Have you been to Brookings?
That's perfect. These hobos, anyway. Sat around the fire eating dog hearts they had roasted on sticks. A battered but lively scene. Jesus' holy heart. Sorry, this is like not anti-Catholic exactly. I understand they're all across the Jesus' holy heart, so forgive me. Multiplied along the skewer, burned with a ghostly, unconsuming flame, all those little everlastings. From what are our lives hanging, one man asked, doffing his straw hat, looking up to the stars as if they were a father or a mother keeping grown-up secrets. Our lives are hanging by our dead. So we cut out their hearts while the word is still on their lips, the quick in their fluttering eyes, simple for them to love and to sing their love. The hobo had begun to drool, but where the drool flowed, a bearded spittle made lacework of his chin. Girl and her dog had been enjoying, so Girl is with her dog at this point, his talk, but were not afraid, but felt the warmth of the fire, felt it clear, like vodka held up to a light bulb, flame raising their skins to attention, bright spikes, first of too much feeling and not enough. Was this what it meant to be consumed by love? To be called by the dead in full simplicity and light, and to answer, to be carried away by my answer, far from myself, to go too far, doing what I never should have done, to rise like gooseflesh towards whiteness that threatens to consume us? Girl, come back from her inside flight, had eaten a full spit of hearts, the blood beneath her nails, the campfire crowding out the night. To eat is to know the coldness of a fork stuck into snow. And then, do I have time for this? You're the gatekeeper, okay. So this is an ending. It's not the ending, because it's in English. But to leave death behind you. To leave death behind you, you have to run very fast, straight ahead, with the lightness of a wren. Be yourself, the swiftness and the light. This is what girl had learned to do. As soon as she felt the red and green light from the church windows pressing into her arms, she leaped. Vaulting over rows of broken pews of glass, her slender, bare feet never touching the bald heads of the saints, squinting out from their fractured panes, she forgot heaviness and sailed along like a squint of dust, falling gracefully through the suggestive and moody cathedral light and out the enormous doors which opened for her like the arms of a tree struck by lightning. The parting embrace of someone whose love has been suffocating to her. A beloved face, full of the gentlest poisons. Goodbye, she tells the doors. I'm on the other side. The sky had turned that special shade that promised the violence of a storm. With fish. I love all the fishing stuff. Like, it's the only way I would catch fish, though, is if it fell from the sky. Like, literally. The violence of a storm. But girl could not be touched by the rain. She skirted the drops that started to fall, past hedges whose leaves had turned animate and wild, a topiary of bears that filled her heart with 100 small secret joys. The leaves rustled with pleasure at her passing ankles, rustled and bit at her, but with a teasing delicacy that she loved, that made her think of nothing, remember nothing, but only lit a candle in her mouth, a candle that the growing pools of water reflected in 100 small waves, an onion flowering in the dark. That's it. Yay!
Are you gonna read anything,
Kim, your turn.
I was worried about everything.
Oh, we got time.
Did you want to say anything, Tashi, about like to close the night out too? Do you want to think about that, or as the executive director?
Okay.
No?
You don't want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll say something.
Okay.
You read, and I'll say something.
All right. To unlock my computer. So I'll just read a couple short things, and then I think we're going to have one more from.
Oh, that's okay,
No?
we can end. I can read it tomorrow.
Okay, or will that be fun? And then Tashi will close us out. So I write these 100s, and they're exactly 100-word vignettes, and I love the discipline of the practice. It's very generative to stick to 100 words, and then I allow myself 1 or 2 words for a title. And I published some of them in, I think the anthology was called Shapes of Native Nonfiction, came out in 2020. I think it's Elise Washuta who's the editor. And then I also published some last year in the Dalhousie Review, which is out of Dalhousie University out in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So these are both written during COVID, and I date them. So the first one is called Winona Quarantine, and it was written on 4/14/20. I hunt cornstarch in cupboards, but yeast is my take. What isolationist bakers covet. In a stealth drive across the sunrise city, I take this offering to a love's snow-dusted porch, her prize to find in the morning light. I binge on decades-old mournful music and sail back across the bridge, the ice river. Are these notes nostalgia for the poverty of 20, when there was less, but more to die for? The medicine man who named our girl Sweet Song Woman said a Winona is protected until her own first is born. I remain protected. I worry for my daughter. And the second one is called River Quantum, Instructions for Baby Girl, and that's what I call my daughter, written 5/13/20. She's 20 years old now, and she's still baby girl. I told her, though, when I have a grandchild, I'm not going to make the mistake of years past. I will not pre-gender my grandchild. I will call them baby they. Tell me when she's like, okay, Mom. I was like, well, none of your friends have genders, babe. Like, you know, I have to catch up here. So, River Quantum. 1/4 my ashes to be spread across the North Saskatchewan, when ice flows and is lit by sun at a bend in central Edmonton. 1/4 to be blown across the heavy Mississippi, back to ancestors in Minneapolis, St. Paul. 3/8 shall be offered up to the Big Sioux, next to the old powwow grounds. Make sure that river is akin to my grandmother who fished its water on close to home days when she did not venture to the Missouri. 1/8. The remainders of me shall be emigrated to the Corrib, my tumultuous river love near Galway's cathedral where I cursed Columbus. Thank you. Are you hyphenating your name, Tashi?
So the tribe won't let me change my name, and so I've been teasing my husband a little bit that, sorry, I'm going to have to change my name back. So I'm Tashi Agnumba, Livermont, Barondo, and I have the good fortune to be Executive Director of the Oak Lake Writers Society. And so I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is one of the largest gatherings, largest retreats we've ever had, as far as I know. I tried to go back through as many pictures as we had, and I think the biggest picture of a group is like on the website, like from 2011, I think. And I think we had a few more, and of course, you know, things happen, a few people couldn't come, but it's really good to see everyone. And so I just want to encourage everyone as we're leaving here, and you know, we didn't know what the Wi-Fi would be like, so we didn't get too techie with this one after having been on Zoom last time. But if people, you know, let us know, we still have all of that information, and we do utilize technology. But sometimes we keep the cameras off. We keep things quiet because the entire gist of the Oak Lake Writers Society from all the founding people has been to decenter whiteness, to create an Oceti Sakowin Oyate centered space. And I think you can feel that when you walk in, and you know, my girl, my baby girl, is waving at me back there. And so, yeah, so I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want us to, now we have our official second board of the Oak Lake Writers Society that's coming in. And so I just want to encourage everyone to share what we have, to not be shy, and to go ahead and let people know what you're doing. And it's really easy. Sometimes we don't want to talk about ourselves, but it's pretty easy to talk about each other. And I love, I don't know if you noticed how excited everyone was about specs. Right along with sex. That was fantastic. I thought that was pretty great. And I don't know how many writers groups are like that. Like, you know, how many genres and subjects, you know. So I just want to thank everyone. Am I forgetting something? Like, I don't know.
Donate. I don't know.
Yeah, send us money.
Yep.
Grassroots organizing is our gig. Well, and speaking of that, you know, and everybody, I feel like a broken record, but I'll say this for the peoples on Facebook, and we'll put this on the website. So our donations are by and large our own people, our own members, and up until a larger gift this spring, also in dollar amounts. And so it's our own members who are giving back. And I mean, name me another organization in Indian country, almost anywhere, but that are funding their own. That's huge. And it started with Elizabeth Cook Lynn and all the people that met in Pierre when we decided to do this awesome, crazy thing. And I just want to thank everyone for this wild, because writers don't want to have to talk about money and crunch numbers. So, and we do that with a lot of heart, and I just want to thank everyone for that. So I was when you were goading me into reading something, I thought about reading Turning Stone and Hesop Away Humble. And you guys you've heard it before and you've read it, I hope. Well, maybe you haven't, I don't know, I won't assume that. But I would like to encourage you to reread it after I tell you something. That story started out as a pro-life statement. I was a student. My thinking had not yet been decolonized on that subject, and it would be at Oak Lake. But when Leniko and Lydia, oh God, I don't even remember, I don't know how many drafts we did, and their gentleness with me, and what eventually developed. I read it the other day, I was like, gosh, how bad is it? and I hear people apologizing tonight for critiquing the church or critiquing things, and I just want to encourage everyone and remind people that Oak Lake can put up with me for this many years. This is a very welcome place to be. And I wouldn't suggest you have thick skin, but that you just listen, maybe take your medicine. This is a very, very good group of people. And what we do, we've been talking about how we can change the culture, how we can transmit culture, how we can do a lot of these things. And I feel like, we might talk about writing. And yeah, try putting this in a grant. We write books, we write poetry. But actually, I feel like, we're not perfect, obviously, but we're really doing some really cool stuff when it comes to, we said it, praxis versus whatever. I don't know,
Philosophy.
Yeah, versus philosophy. So I just want to encourage everyone to, for all the people sitting on the fence about coming to our retreats and training, I just want to throw that out there. So anything else? Am I forgetting something? Donate. We have a donation thing on our website. Anything else?
What's our website?
Oh, yeah. OaklakeRiderSociety.com. Yeah. Oh, and please take pie home. Plenty of pie.
When you stop live streaming, I have a ghost story for you.
Okay, so we're going to turn off the live stream so we can go back to our ghost stories. Okay. All right, everybody say Doksha.